Marcus Williams thought he knew exactly what he'd find when he inherited his grandmother's old Victorian house on Maple Street. Dust. Cobwebs. Maybe some vintage furniture worth selling. What he didn't expect was the sound of children's laughter echoing through rooms that should have been empty. Standing in the doorway with keys still trembling in his hand, Marcus watched a woman he'd never seen before help two young kids with their homework at his grandmother's kitchen table. They looked up at him with wide, startled eyes. The woman's face went pale. "Please," she whispered, instinctively pulling the children closer. "We have nowhere else to go." In that moment, Marcus faced a choice that would transform not just his life, but his understanding of what family really means. This is the story of how a chance inheritance became the foundation for something far more valuable than property, and how sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most unexpected complications. Marcus Williams had always been a man of plans. At 34, he ran his small accounting firm with military precision, kept his apartment spotless, and maintained a calendar that would make efficiency experts weep with joy. So when his grandmother Dorothy passed away and left him her house, he already had everything mapped out. Clean it out over the weekend, put it on the market by Monday, and use the proceeds to finally take that European vacation he'd been planning for 3 years. The house on Maple Street sat like a forgotten memory between two modern developments. Dorothy had lived there for 60 years, raising 4 children and watching the neighborhood change around her. Marcus remembered visiting as a child, running through rooms that seemed enormous then, but would probably feel cramped now. The last time he'd been there was Christmas 2 years ago, when Dorothy was already showing signs of the dementia that would eventually take her. He pulled into the driveway that Saturday morning, coffee in hand and a mental checklist already forming. The house looked tired. Paint peeling from the shutters, garden overgrown with weeds that had claimed victory over Dorothy's once pristine flower beds. But it was still solid, still valuable. The neighborhood had gentrified enough that even this fixer-upper would sell for more than Dorothy could have imagined. Marcus grabbed his cleaning supplies from the trunk and approached the front door. The key stuck a little, just like it always had. He had to jiggle it twice before the lock gave way. The door swung open with a creak that echoed through what should have been an empty house. But it wasn't empty. The sound hit him first. Soft voices coming from the kitchen. A woman's voice, patient and gentle, helping someone with what sounded like multiplication tables. Then, a child's voice, frustrated but trying. 8 times 7. 8 times 7. Why can't I remember 8 times 7? Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his cleaning supplies forgotten in his hands. Light filtered through the kitchen window, illuminating a scene that made no sense. A woman sat at Dorothy's old oak table, the one with the ring stains from countless coffee cups and homework sessions. 2 children flanked her, textbooks and papers scattered between them. The woman looked up first. She was probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that had seen better days but were clean and carefully maintained. Her face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession. Confusion. Recognition. Fear. "Oh God," she whispered, instinctively moving to shield the children. "You're Marcus." The children turned to stare at him. A boy who looked about 10, all knobby knees and serious eyes behind thick glasses. A girl perhaps 7, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit that had clearly been loved to the point of needing multiple surgeries. "I'm sorry," Marcus managed, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. "I didn't know anyone was here." The woman stood slowly, her hands resting protectively on the children's shoulders. "Your grandmother," she said, her voice careful and measured. "She said we could stay until we got back on our feet. I'm Sarah Mitchell. These are my kids, Tommy and Emma." Marcus set his supplies down with deliberate care, buying himself time to think. Dorothy had never mentioned anything about tenants. But then, again, Dorothy's mind hadn't been reliable toward the end. The family had handled her affairs through her lawyer, making sure bills were paid and the house was maintained. But if she'd made some informal arrangement. "How long have you been here?" he asked. Sarah's chin lifted slightly, a gesture that spoke of someone used to defending herself. 6 months. Since my husband died. David was deployed overseas, and, when he. She stopped, swallowed hard. Dorothy found us at the shelter. Said she couldn't stand the thought of children sleeping in cars when she had all these empty rooms. The shelter. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He looked around the kitchen with new eyes. Children's artwork hung on the refrigerator alongside Dorothy's old grocery lists. A booster seat sat at the table. Small shoes lined up neatly by the back door. Mrs. Dorothy was teaching me chess, Tommy said suddenly, his voice small but determined. She said I was getting really good. Emma clutched her rabbit tighter. She made us cookies every Tuesday, she whispered. Chocolate chip. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his carefully laid plans crumbling around him. He'd come here to clean out a house, not to displace a family. But what was he supposed to do? He had a business to run, bills to pay. This house was supposed to be his financial cushion, not another responsibility. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. We can be out by tonight, she said quickly. I just need a few hours to pack our things. I've been saving up, and there's a motel out by the highway that takes weekly rates. A motel? The words came out harsher than Marcus intended. Both children flinched. He forced his voice softer. How old are they? Tommy's 10, Emma's 7. Sarah's voice was steady, but Marcus could see her hands shaking slightly. Look, Mr. Williams, I know this is awkward. Your grandmother never put anything in writing. It was just, she was lonely, and we needed help, and it worked for everyone. But I understand that things have changed. Marcus looked around the kitchen again. Really looked this time. The children's belongings were few but carefully maintained. Homework was spread out in neat piles. Someone had been taking care of the house too. The floors were clean, windows sparkled, and the ancient appliances gleamed like they hadn't in years. Have you been maintaining the place? He asked. Sarah nodded. Dorothy couldn't do much toward the end. I took over most of the household tasks. Cleaning, minor repairs, gardening. She insisted on paying the utilities and groceries, but I handled everything else. It felt like the least I could do. The boy, Tommy, adjusted his glasses and spoke up with the seriousness that only children facing adult problems possess. Mom's really good at fixing things. She fixed the washing machine when it started making that noise, and she painted the bathroom when the wallpaper started peeling. Marcus found himself studying Sarah more carefully. There were paint stains under her fingernails and small calluses on her hands that spoke of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. The kind of care that had been lavished on the house was evident everywhere he looked. What did you do before? He asked. For work, I mean. I was a nurse, Sarah said. But, after David died, I couldn't keep up with the childcare costs on my salary. The kids were too young for after-school programs, and daycare was more than my take-home pay. I've been looking for something with better hours, maybe in a doctor's office or clinic. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. Are we going to have to leave the nice house, Mama? Sarah's composure cracked slightly. She knelt down to Emma's level, smoothing the child's hair with infinite tenderness. We might have to go stay somewhere else for a while, baby. But it'll be okay. We'll figure it out. Marcus watched this interaction and felt something he hadn't expected. His grandmother's voice, clear as day in his memory. That boy's too serious for his own good, she used to say about him. Needs to learn there's more to life than spreadsheets and schedules. The practical part of his mind was already calculating. Mortgage rates. Property values. The cost of selling versus the potential rental income. But, another part, a part that sounded suspiciously like Dorothy, was asking different questions. What kind of man threw a family out onto the street? What would happen to these kids if they ended up in a motel? The motel, he said carefully. How long could you afford to stay there? Sarah's jaw tightened. Long enough to find something permanent. I've got some savings, and I'm working with a placement agency. There's a position at the medical center that might open up next month. And, until then? We'll manage. The words came out with a fierce pride that reminded Marcus of his grandmother. Dorothy had never asked for help either, even when she probably should have. Marcus looked around the kitchen one more time. At the homework spread across the table. At the children's art on the refrigerator. At the small family that had somehow made this house feel lived in again in a way it probably hadn't since his own childhood. He thought about his plan. Clean, sell, vacation. Simple. Efficient. Profitable. Then, he thought about Tommy learning chess from his grandmother. About Emma and her Tuesday cookies. About Sarah working her fingers raw to maintain a house that didn't belong to her because an old woman had shown kindness to strangers. What if, he said slowly, the words coming out before he'd fully formed the thought, you didn't have to leave right away? Sarah's eyes widened. I don't understand. Marcus wasn't entirely sure he understood either. But something in his chest had loosened when Emma asked about leaving the nice house. Something that felt dangerously like the way Dorothy used to make decisions, with her heart instead of her head. I mean, he said, commitment growing with each word, what if we figured out some kind of arrangement? Temporarily. Until you get back on your feet. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of a house settling around them, walls that had sheltered his grandmother for 60 years and were now sheltering 3 people who had nowhere else to go. Tommy pushed his glasses up his nose. You mean we could stay? Marcus looked at the boy's hopeful face, at Emma clutching her rabbit, at Sarah trying not to cry with relief and confusion and terror all at once. Yeah, he said, surprising himself with how right it felt. I think that's exactly what I mean. Marcus spent the next 3 weeks questioning every decision he'd ever made in his adult life. What had seemed like a simple act of kindness on that Saturday morning had turned into a complicated dance of boundaries, schedules, and the kind of daily chaos he'd spent years carefully avoiding. Living with children, he discovered, was like trying to run a business during a continuous earthquake. Everything he thought he knew about order and routine crumbled under the assault of forgotten lunchboxes, mysteriously sticky doorknobs, and the inexplicable ability of 2 small humans to use every towel in the house within a single day. The first challenge had been logistics. Sarah had insisted on sleeping on the living room couch, giving the children Dorothy's old sewing room that she'd converted into a makeshift bedroom with twin beds from the attic. Marcus had the master bedroom, but somehow the entire house felt smaller with 3 extra people in it. Then, there was the schedule. Marcus was used to leaving for work at exactly 7:30, returning at 6:15, and spending his evenings in blessed quiet with spreadsheets and financial reports. Now his mornings began with the sound of Sarah trying to convince Emma that yes, she did have to wear shoes to school, and no, the stuffed rabbit could not come to 2nd grade. But, Mr. Hoppy helps me with math, Emma had argued that first Monday morning, tears threatening. Honey, we talked about this. Mr. Hoppy needs to stay home and guard the house. Marcus had paused in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching this negotiation unfold. Sarah looked exhausted. She'd been up late the night before, researching nursing jobs on Dorothy's ancient computer and filling out applications by the light of the desk lamp. What if Mr. Hoppy stayed in your backpack? Marcus had found himself suggesting. Like a secret guardian? Emma's face had lit up like Christmas morning. Sarah had looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and surprise that made something warm settle in his chest. These small moments were becoming more frequent. Tommy asking for help with his science project about the solar system, spreading poster board across the kitchen table while Marcus tried to remember everything he'd once known about Jupiter's moons. Emma insisting on showing him her drawings, elaborate crayon masterpieces that she taped to the refrigerator with the reverence of a gallery curator. Sarah was harder to read. She maintained a careful politeness that spoke of someone who'd learned not to take anything for granted. She cooked dinner every night, cleaned obsessively, and refused Marcus's offers to help with groceries or utilities. We had an arrangement with your grandmother, she'd say whenever he brought up money. I maintained the house, she covered expenses. I can't pay rent yet, but I can earn my keep. The house did sparkle under Sarah's care. Marcus had never seen the hardwood floors gleam the way they did now, never noticed how the afternoon light caught the crystal vase on the mantelpiece when it was actually clean. Sarah had a gift for making old things beautiful again, for finding the potential in what others might overlook. But it was more than just cleaning. She'd been slowly restoring Dorothy's garden, coaxing life back into flower beds that had been dormant for years. Marcus would sometimes catch glimpses of her from his office window, kneeling in the dirt with Emma beside her, teaching his daughter about seeds and soil and the patience required to grow something beautiful. His daughter. The thought had slipped into his mind so naturally that it took him a moment to recognize how strange it was. Emma wasn't his daughter. Neither was Tommy his son. But, somehow, somewhere in the chaos of the past few weeks, the lines had begun to blur. It was Tommy who finally cracked the careful walls Marcus had built around himself. The boy had been struggling with a math assignment, long division problems that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all the sense they made to a 10-year-old brain. "I'm stupid," Tommy had declared, throwing down his pencil in frustration. "David was good at math. He could have helped me. But I'm just stupid." David. Sarah's late husband. The children's father. A man Marcus had never met but whose presence lingered in the house like a gentle ghost. Tommy's thick glasses were David's. Emma's bedtime story ritual had been something David started. Sarah's careful strength was built on the foundation of a love that had been cut short by an IED on a road halfway around the world. "You're not stupid," Marcus had said, settling into the chair beside Tommy. "You just need a different way of looking at it." They'd worked through the problems together, Marcus breaking down the steps in ways his accounting brain could translate for a frustrated 10-year-old. By the end of the session, Tommy was flying through calculations that had seemed impossible an hour before. "You're really good at this," Tommy had said, looking up at Marcus with something that might have been admiration. "Maybe you could help me with my homework sometimes?" "Yeah," Marcus had replied, surprised by how much the simple request meant to him. "I'd like that." These moments were accumulating like interest in a savings account. Emma curling up beside him on the couch during movie nights, her small warm weight against his arm. Sarah laughing at his terrible jokes over dinner. Tommy proudly showing off math tests that bore the evidence of their evening study sessions. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were arguments about bedtimes and screen time and whether 7-year-olds really needed to clean their rooms every single day. There were nights when Emma had nightmares about losing another parent figure, and Tommy's occasional angry outbursts when the weight of being the man of the family became too much for his small shoulders. Marcus was learning that love wasn't just the warm, fuzzy feeling he'd imagined. Love was Sarah up at 2 a.m. with a sick child, her own exhaustion forgotten in the face of Emma's fever. Love was Tommy carefully saving half his Halloween candy to share with Marcus because you work really hard and you should have something sweet too. Love was 1,000 small acts of care and consideration, the daily choice to put someone else's needs ahead of your own convenience. The crisis came on a Thursday evening in November. Marcus had been working late, trying to finish quarterly reports before the deadline. When he came home, he found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and her laptop, her face pale with stress. "Everything okay?" he asked, though clearly it wasn't. Sarah looked up, and, for the first time since he'd known her, she looked defeated. "The medical center position fell through," she said quietly. "They decided to promote someone internal instead." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What about other applications?" "Still waiting to hear back from a few places." "But..." She gestured helplessly at the bills spread across the table. "The savings are almost gone. I've been putting off the kids' dental checkups, rationing their medications. Emma needs new shoes, and Tommy's glasses prescription has changed. I don't know how much longer I can make this work." Marcus studied the bills, his accountant's eye automatically calculating totals and timelines. It wasn't a huge amount of money by his standards, but, for a single mother with limited income, it might as well have been a mountain. "What if I helped?" he said. Sarah's spine stiffened. "No. Absolutely not. We've already taken too much from your family. You've taken nothing. You've been caring for my grandmother's house, helping me understand what she wanted this place to be. If anything, I owe you. You owe me a roof over our heads, which is more than anyone else offered. I won't take charity on top of that. Marcus sat down across from her, choosing his words carefully. What if it wasn't charity? What if it was an investment? Sarah frowned. I don't understand. This house needs work. Real renovation to reach its full potential. New paint, updated fixtures, landscaping. You've got skills I don't have. What if we made it official? You handle the renovations, I cover materials and living expenses. When it's done, we split the increased property value. Sarah stared at him. You're talking about a partnership. I'm talking about family, Marcus said, the words surprising him with their certainty. Because that's what we've become, isn't it? Family doesn't keep score. Family helps each other. From the living room came the sound of the children getting ready for bed, Tommy reading to Emma in the patient voice of an older brother who'd learned to be gentle with frightened little sisters. Their voices mixed with the settling sounds of the old house, creating a symphony of belonging that Marcus had never realized he'd been longing for. Sarah was quiet for a long time, studying his face as if trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, she spoke. David used to say that God puts people in your path exactly when you need them most. I thought he was being sentimental. Maybe he was right. Marcus, she said, her voice soft with something that might have been hope. Are you sure about this? Really sure? Because these kids have lost enough already. I can't let them get attached to someone who might change his mind. Marcus thought about his old life. His quiet apartment. His predictable routines. His careful plans for a future that had seemed so clear just a month ago. Then, he thought about Emma's artwork on the refrigerator. Tommy's proud face when he mastered a difficult math problem. Sarah's laugh over dinner. The way the house felt alive again with voices and footsteps and the beautiful mess of people who cared about each other. I'm sure, he said. More sure than I've ever been about anything. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Then, I guess we're partners. Partners, Marcus agreed, though he suspected they were something much more than that. Something that didn't have a name in business contracts but felt like the most important deal he'd ever made. From upstairs came Tommy's voice, calling down. Mom? Marcus? Emma wants you both to say goodnight. Sarah looked at Marcus with raised eyebrows. Both of us? Apparently we're a team now, Marcus said, standing and offering her his hand. Come on, partner. Let's go tuck in our kids. The word slipped out so naturally that neither of them commented on it. But, as they climbed the stairs together, Marcus caught Sarah's small smile and knew she'd heard it too. Our kids. Their kids. The family they'd accidentally built while trying to solve more practical problems. At the top of the stairs, Emma was waiting in her pajamas, Mr. Hoppy clutched in her arms and her hair in two crooked pigtails that spoke of Tommy's well-meaning but inexperienced braiding skills. Story time, she asked hopefully. Story time, Marcus and Sarah said in unison, and Emma's delighted giggle followed them into the converted sewing room that had become something much more precious than either of them could have planned. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the driveway of 1247 Maple Street, watching Tommy and Emma chase fireflies in the front yard while Sarah deadhead roses in the garden they'd planted together last spring. The house behind them glowed with warm light from every window, transformed from the tired structure he'd inherited into something that looked like it belonged on the cover of a home magazine. But, the transformation went deeper than fresh paint and new shutters. The house had found its soul again, filled with the kind of laughter and love that his grandmother Dorothy had always insisted made a building into a home. The renovation project had become their shared mission over the winter and spring. Sarah had thrown herself into research with the dedication of someone who'd found her true calling. She'd discovered a talent for design that went far beyond basic maintenance, envisioning possibilities that Marcus's practical mind would never have conceived. What if we opened up this wall, she'd suggested one January evening, gesturing at the barrier between the kitchen and dining room. create one big space for family meals and homework and just life in general? Marcus had run the structural calculations while Sarah sketched floor plans on graph paper. Tommy had appointed himself assistant contractor, measuring twice and cutting never, while Emma served as official paint color consultant with the serious demeanor of someone entrusted with crucial decisions. The work had been harder than either of them anticipated. Old houses, they learned, held surprises behind every wall. Wiring that belonged in a museum. Plumbing that had been installed by optimists rather than professionals. Insulation that appeared to consist primarily of good intentions and mouse nests. But they'd tackled each challenge together. Marcus handling the technical aspects while Sarah provided creative vision and the children contributed enthusiastic moral support. Evening became planning sessions around the kitchen table, now scarred with coffee rings and construction drawings and Emma's latest masterpieces. The breakthrough had come in March, when Sarah landed a position as head nurse at a pediatric clinic across town. The job offered exactly what she'd been searching for: reasonable hours, excellent benefits, and work that felt meaningful rather than just financially necessary. "I can finally contribute properly," she'd announced after her first week, pulling out her checkbook with the pride of someone who'd fought hard to be self-sufficient again. But Marcus had learned something about partnership over the months they'd lived together. Real partnership wasn't about equal financial contributions or carefully balanced scorecards. It was about each person giving what they could, when they could, in whatever form their gifts took. "Keep your money for the kids' college funds," he'd said. "You're giving this place something it can't buy." He was right. Sarah's contributions couldn't be measured in dollars. She'd brought life back to Dorothy's garden, coaxing blooms from soil that had been dormant for years. She'd learned to repair antique fixtures with the patience of a restorer, bringing Dorothy's crystal chandelier back to glittering life. Most importantly, she'd filled the house with the sound of family, making every room feel welcoming and lived in. The children had bloomed too. Tommy's confidence had grown along with his math skills, his serious demeanor giving way to the kind of mischief that was healthy in a 10-year-old boy. He'd made friends at school, joining the chess club where he dominated opponents with strategies Dorothy had taught him and Marcus had refined. Emma had lost the terrified wariness that had marked her first months after losing her father. She chattered constantly now, filling every silence with questions and observations and elaborate stories about Mr. Hoppy's secret adventures. Her artwork had evolved from anxious scribbles to elaborate family portraits that showed four stick figures holding hands in front of a house with flowers in every window. But the most significant transformation had been in the relationship between Marcus and Sarah. What had started as a practical arrangement between strangers had deepened into something neither of them had expected. Trust had grown in the spaces between shared responsibilities. Friendship had developed over late-night conversations after the children were asleep. And, somewhere along the way, friendship had quietly become something more. It hadn't been a dramatic revelation. There was no moment when music swelled and they fell into each other's arms. Instead, love had accumulated in tiny moments. Sarah bringing him coffee during his early morning work sessions. Marcus leaving little notes in Emma's lunchbox when Sarah was running late. Comfortable silences during evening walks around the neighborhood. Shared glances when the children did something particularly adorable or particularly exasperating. The first time he'd kissed her had been utterly ordinary and absolutely perfect. A Tuesday evening in May, both of them covered in paint from refinishing the back porch, arguing good-naturedly about whether the trim should be sage green or cream. She'd gotten paint in her hair, and, when he reached out to brush it away, she'd looked up at him with those brown eyes that had learned to trust again, and the kiss had happened as naturally as breathing. "Is this okay?" he'd whispered against her forehead afterward. "It's more than okay," she'd whispered back. "It's everything I didn't dare hope for." They'd told the children together that evening, though Marcus suspected Tommy had figured it out weeks earlier. The boy was observant, had been watching the way Marcus looked at his mother with the protective awareness of someone who'd already lost one father figure. "Does this mean Marcus is going to be our dad now?" Emma had asked with the directness of someone too young for subtlety. Sarah had looked at Marcus, a question in her eyes. They'd talked about the future in general terms, but never with this kind of specificity. If that's what you want, Marcus had said, speaking to Emma but looking at Tommy, knowing the boy's approval was crucial. If that's what you all want. Tommy had been quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus through his thick glasses. Then, he'd nodded solemnly. I think Dad would like you, he'd said. You take care of us the way he would have. The wedding had been Dorothy's idea, or at least that's how it felt when they found her wedding dress preserved in a trunk in the attic, along with photo albums filled with pictures of ceremonies held in this very house. Sarah had tried the dress on as a joke, but it fit as if it had been made for her, and, when Marcus saw her in it, any remaining doubts about destiny vanished completely. They'd been married in the garden on a perfect June morning, surrounded by friends from work and neighbors who'd watched their unusual family come together with the kind of warmth that small communities reserve for love stories they've witnessed firsthand. Tommy had walked Sarah down the aisle with the serious dignity of someone entrusted with precious cargo. Emma had been flower girl, scattering rose petals with the enthusiasm of someone finally convinced that happy endings were possible. Now, watching his family enjoy the summer evening, Marcus marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a bachelor with a carefully ordered life and modest ambitions. Tonight, he was a husband and father, co-owner of a beautifully restored home that served as headquarters for a family that shouldn't have worked but absolutely did. Daddy! Emma called, the title still new enough to make Marcus's chest tighten with happiness. Come catch fireflies with us. Sarah looked up from her roses and smiled at him, her face glowing in the gathering dusk. Go on, she said. I'll finish up here and bring out lemonade. Marcus joined the children in their quest to capture lightning bugs in mason jars, Tommy explaining the scientific principles behind bioluminescence while Emma insisted that the fireflies were actually tiny fairies who granted wishes if you were gentle enough with them. What would you wish for? Marcus asked Emma as she carefully released a firefly back into the warm air. Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. I would wish for us to stay together forever and ever, she said. All of us. In our beautiful house. Tommy adjusted his glasses and nodded sagely. That's a good wish. But I think it already came true. As if summoned by the conversation, Sarah appeared with a tray of lemonade and cookies, settling on the porch swing that Marcus had restored as a surprise for her birthday. What came true? She asked. Emma wished for us to stay together forever, Tommy explained. I told her it already happened. Sarah's eyes found Marcus across the yard, and the smile they shared was full of the kind of contentment that comes from surviving difficulties together and emerging stronger. I think Tommy's right, she said. Some wishes come true before you even know to ask for them. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the fireflies had given way to stars, Marcus and Sarah sat on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder, both of them tired in the best possible way. Do you ever miss it? Sarah asked softly. Your old life? The quiet and the predictability? Marcus considered the question, thinking about the man he'd been a year ago. That Marcus had lived in a tidy apartment where nothing was ever out of place, where the only sounds were the hum of appliances and the distant traffic. He'd had plans and schedules and a 5-year financial forecast that didn't include space for anyone else's dreams. I miss the simplicity sometimes, he admitted. But I wouldn't trade this chaos for anything. This beautiful, complicated, wonderful chaos. Sarah tilted her head to look at him. Even when Emma uses your aftershave as perfume? Or when Tommy turns the living room into a solar system model? Especially then, Marcus said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Those are the moments when I remember what Dorothy was trying to tell me all those years. That a house isn't a home until it's full of love and mess and people who drive you crazy in the best possible way. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of a neighborhood settling into sleep. Crickets chirping in the garden Sarah had brought back to life. The distant sound of a train whistle carrying dreams to somewhere new. The soft whisper of wind through leaves on trees that had watched this house shelter 4 generations of families. I love you, Sarah said suddenly, the words floating into the darkness like a prayer. I love you too, Marcus replied, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything in his carefully planned life. All of you. This whole beautiful disaster we've built together. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, blessing a family that had found each other through loss and loneliness and the kind of grace that comes disguised as unexpected complications. Inside the house, two children slept peacefully in rooms that finally felt permanent, their dreams filled with the certainty that they were loved and safe and home. And, on Maple Street, in a Victorian house that had seen nearly a century of families come and go, love had once again worked its quiet magic, transforming strangers into family and proving that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are the ones you never plan to reach. The renovation was complete, but the real project, the work of building a life together, was just beginning. And Marcus Williams, who had once believed that the best plans were the ones you could control, had finally learned that the most important things in life were the ones that chose you, arriving unannounced and changing everything in ways you never could have imagined but wouldn't change for all the predictability in the world.